Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Jewish Policy Center webinar. I am Shoshana Bryan, Senior Director of the JPC, and your host. Before we get to today's really terrific guest, Richard Goldberg, I want to thank those of you who filled out the post-webinar survey last week. I learned a lot from your comments. I hope more of you will fill out those surveys. But one of the things I learned is that you want more time with our speaker. So I'm going to do the short form of the JPC commercial today and get right to it. The Jewish Policy Center provides analysis of foreign and domestic policies by leading scholars, academics, and commentators. You can find our work on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org. That's jewishpolicycenter.org. You can sign up there for our Insight articles and see our magazine, In Focus Quarterly. The summer issue of In Focus Quarterly is up now, and I have to tell you, I think it's a pretty good one. If you've missed some of our webinars, you can find them all on the website, and you can download them. And listen, some of them will be a little outdated now, but I guarantee you there's a lot of good information. So jewishpolicycenter.org. The JPC, as most of you already know, supports a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense. We support the legitimacy and security of Israel against anyone who would deny them. We advocate for small government, low taxes, free trade, fiscal responsibility, energy security, free speech, and intellectual diversity. Today's program is focused on Iran, and so many things have been happening that I, frankly, do not know where to start, which is where our guest today, Richard Goldberg, becomes extremely important, because when I'm confused about Iran, I turn to Rich Goldberg and learn things. Richard Goldberg is Senior Advisor to the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and co-host of Jewish Insider's Limited Liability podcast. He previously served as, long title coming here, Director for Countering Iranian Weapons of Mass Destruction for the White House National Security Council. He was Chief of Staff to Illinois Governor Bruce Rauner and Deputy Chief of Staff and Foreign Policy Advisor to U.S. Senator Mark Kirk of Illinois, I think, one of the Senate's great members. We miss him. On Capitol Hill, Rich was the Republican Staff Director for the Congressional Task Force Against Anti-Semitism. He was spearheaded the major expansion of U.S.-Israel missile defense cooperation and drafted the toughest sanctions ever imposed on Iran. In the governor's office, he authored the first ever state legislation to divest public funds from companies engaged in boycotts of Israel. On the National Security Council, he coordinated key elements of the Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign against Iran. He himself was sanctioned by Iran in August of 2020, which I assume he considers a great honor. Rich served as a U.S. Navy Reserve intelligence officer with the rank of lieutenant commander. In 2011, he deployed with the squadron to Afghanistan and served as the Jewish lay leader for Bagram Airfield. And now, Rich, I turn this over to you with the reminder to our listeners, the Q&A function on the Zoom screen is open and I'm monitoring. So Richard Goldberg, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, and thanks everybody for tuning in, and for those observing today, wishing you a meaningful and easy fast as well. This is the ninth day of Av. I want to start with a little bit of an overview of where we are in the Iran policy of the United States, which is opaque at best. But if you look at various tea leaves and you follow the right news sources, and most importantly, you follow the money, as both criminals and law enforcement would always like to say, you will get to probably a 90% answer of what is really going on. Okay, so several weeks ago, we had a flurry of news reports based mostly on leaks out of other countries, other diplomatic sources, the Europeans, the Israelis, others we imagine, many Israeli newspapers, but also the Journal, the New York Times, others, all confirming this from their range of diplomatic sources, that the United States had briefed them that it was working on some sort of an understanding with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Not an agreement, mind you, not a deal, an understanding. The language being a term of art to try to avoid any implication that the U.S. would have to submit something to the Congress under that 2015 Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act, or INARA, as you probably know it. And so this understanding supposedly would be the United States freeing up billions of dollars of frozen cash of the Iranians that exist in various bank accounts around the world, and also a few $1 billion out of the International Monetary Fund in the form of special drawing rights. And in exchange, ultimately the Iranians would somehow hold off on further escalation of their nuclear program. Right now, they are enriching uranium every day at low levels, at 3 to 5%. They are enriching uranium every day at semi-high levels, 20% enriched uranium, and they are enriching uranium every day at very high levels, 60% high enriched uranium, at least once during a retooling of their centrifuge cascade in one facility, being caught by the International Atomic Energy Agency having produced 84% enriched uranium, just on the threshold there of weapons grade uranium, which we consider 90% or above. And so the deal would be, just don't go to 90%. That's all we ask of you, and we'll pay you a few $1 billion to do that. Now, the New York Times had a few other conditions that supposedly have been passed by the United States to the Iranians through Oman acting as the main interlocutor in this dialogue. And it said, we ask that you not kill Americans or attack Americans in Syria. We ask that you do not send ballistic missiles to Russia to use against Ukraine, but notably, you can still continue to supply Russia with other armed drones and ammunition. You can still do other nefarious activities in the region, and no word, no concession there on the ongoing assassination plot to try to kill former U.S. officials, John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, Brian Hook, and others that you've read about in the press. Now, where do you get this money? How does this money suddenly appear for the Iranians in such an understanding? Well, remember that over the course of our reimposition of U.S. sanctions since the Trump administration got out of the Iran deal, first, there was a long period of time, about 6 months or more, where foreign powers that were importing oil from Iran were allowed to keep importing oil from Iran so long as they paid for that oil by putting money into escrow accounts in their own country that the Iranians couldn't access. And so for the course of time that Iran had been still exporting its oil to, we'll call them westernized type nations, not China, not Russia, not an illicit actor, but Japan, South Korea, India, etc. Those countries were putting money into these escrow accounts. And then once we ended those sanctions waivers in 2019, and all of the wind down periods were done after those waivers, that money became trapped in the tens of billions of dollars. We also had a special agreement going on in Iraq, where a lot of money has built up and continues to get built up, because Iraq depends on Iran, unfortunately, for energy. It depends on Iran for the supply of electricity and natural gas to fuel some of their electricity as well domestically. And so what we have seen, unfortunately, is over time, this money has been building up. The Iranians have making all kinds of threats against the Iraqis if the Iraqis will not loosen restrictions imposed by the United States on that money. And so we have seen in recent days a series of steps taken by the United States to loosen restrictions on that money and give Iran access. Some reports put this at $10 to $11 billion that are in these accounts. And remember, this is not just one-time money. These are ongoing payments because Iraq continues importing electricity and natural gas with the authorization of the U.S. government. First, we saw reports just about a month ago at this point that the United States had authorized Iraq to release $2.75 billion for Iran to pay off invoices, imports, dues to membership organizations, other things. Then we saw an Iranian official a week or two later say, actually, we now have been given access by the United States to all $10 billion that's sitting in Iraq for us to be able to pay off debts as we like. Then we saw an announcement from Iraq that it had decided and agreed with Iran to trade its oil as payment for Iranian natural gas, an oil for gas barter. And it claimed in public reporting that you can Google that this somehow fell outside the purview of U.S. sanctions. And of course, sanctions experts have looked at this, I've looked at this, and the sanctions law that we passed in the Senate into law about 11 years ago at this point covers this kind of a transaction and makes it sanctionable. Even though we do have exceptions for natural gas, the way they would be conducting this, the interlocutors on the Iranian side, the fact that oil is a sanctioned commodity to trade with Iran makes this entire deal subject to U.S. sanctions and impossible to pull off unless the U.S. Treasury Department had given some sort of a nod, some sort of an authorization for this to go forward, and it was somehow included and encompassed in a formal waiver that had been sent to Capitol Hill by the administration, which reportedly has happened. Then we thought, okay, so now they have already released $2.75 billion out of there. There's up to $10 billion accessible. Apparently not good enough for the Iranians. They want more stuff now, immediately. So now there's an oil for gas barter going on. Then we learned just in the last week, and this is really big, that the U.S. government modified its waiver again and authorized now Iraq to transfer all of its money to make payments going forward outside of its escrow account in Baghdad. This is a precedent-setting event to unlock these escrow accounts for the first time in our sanctions history while we've had sanctions going back to 2013, pre-JCPOA. Obviously, while we were in the Iran nuclear deal, none of this was going on. But since 2018, we've been requiring these escrow accounts. We are now breaking out of the escrow account model, allowing Iraq to put all its money into a bank account now in Oman, reportedly, which the U.S. will have some sort of custodianship over with the Omanis. And the U.S. will now be helping the Iranians figure out what money to release and for what bills to pay, helping Iran subsidize its import crisis, its currency crisis, all of these crises you're reading about, its cash flow problems. And we will literally become the banker, the custodial banker for the Islamic Republic of Iran going forward with cash out of Oman. Now, why is this important? Not only are we now giving the sanctions relief today to Iran, we also have reports of another bucket of money that has been under negotiation and technical review for how to move out of South Korea for months. There's $7 billion sitting in a South Korean escrow account as well that belongs to the Iranians, part of these frozen assets. These are accounts, by the way, that belong to the National Iranian Oil Company, the Central Bank of Iran, both institutions currently subject to terrorism sanctions by the United States, in addition to our broader sanctions on oil transactions and transactions with the central bank. But be that as it may, there has been this ongoing more than a year negotiation between the United States and Iran to release that $7 billion, move it to some other bank in the Middle East, either Oman or Qatar. Now we know it's obviously likely going to be Oman based on where the Iraqi money has moved to. And in exchange, there would be a hostage release. Remember, the Iranians hold, we believed, 3 U.S. hostages. We've just learned in the last week and a half they have taken a 4th U.S. hostage, which has complicated this negotiation. That's why this deal hasn't happened yet. They're increasing the price tag for how much money they want out of the U.S. to release all 4 hostages, and the Biden administration does not want to leave anybody behind because it will already be getting politically eviscerated for the highest ransom payment in the history of hostage negotiation at $7 billion for 3 people. It can't leave behind an American citizen after paying $7 billion, which, by the way, it shouldn't be doing in the first place. And so it is possible we may now see some more sleight of hand where the $7 billion in South Korea gets authorized to be transferred into this Omani bank account, again under U.S. custodianship, helping the Iranians figure out what bills to pay, how to keep their economy moving along. This is not a deal, mind you, according to Secretary Blinken, who appeared on Fareed Zakaria this past Sunday and said there's no agreement on the table. We're not talking about a nuclear agreement right now. Legally precise words. He goes on to say in that interview, we are providing messages to the Iranians about the potential consequences if they continue to escalate, while continuing to seek de-escalation. This is how they are defining the parameters of this understanding and the messages being passed back and forth through Oman. We're just going to start releasing money. We're going to make funds available. We're going to show on our part how we're willing to quote unquote de-escalate by helping Iran pay its bills. And all we're asking is that Iran de-escalate in return some commensurate measures, not go to weapons grade uranium, not attack our forces in Syria, not transfer ballistic missiles going beyond drones to Ukraine. Why is this all folly, by the way? Of course, this is completely ridiculous. A, it's obviously a deal that should be submitted to Congress for review. They're evading U.S. law. But besides that, we are literally paying, or at least offering to pay Iran to stay on the nuclear threshold, right? Not get rid of its uranium stockpile, not get rid of its centrifuges, not shut down a facility or destroy a facility. Literally stay at the precipice of the nuclear weapons capability threshold, build up that capability underneath, more 60% enrichment, more 20% enrichment, more centrifuge manufacturing, potentially diverted centrifuges. Mind you, they've stopped the IAEA's access to monitor their manufacturing of centrifuges. That's been over a year now. All of that continues. No discussion of a new secret site that we know about from commercial satellite imagery that's being constructed near the Natanz nuclear facility. This is a deep underground facility. The Iranians have claimed they intend to make it for centrifuge manufacturing. They need to have a military impenetrable facility below a mountain so that the United States could not impede their construction of centrifuges, is their story. And according to them, they don't need to declare anything to the IAEA for a centrifuge manufacturing facility. We believe, A, they do actually need to declare something here, and B, they are actually planning to make that a secret enrichment site. And it will be more hardened, more impenetrable to military action than the Fordo facility you always hear about over by Qom. If that facility is completed, and they move their centrifuges into that facility, and they begin weaponization work in that facility, we have already seen the red line. It went back in the rearview mirror. No discussion, no demand for that site to be halted. In fact, Iran will be able to continue to be paid to help subsidize construction of that site. All of this is a very worrisome picture of what we have. Meanwhile, that shroud of secrecy that continues to go on, where we deny there's any deal going on, money's being released, and we have yet to see Iran escalate in certain ways in the nuclear program on Russia and Syria, which were the requests. There is something else going on that has not been revealed yet. There is some threat in the intelligence picture that the United States sees that is driving a response. What could that be, and why do we think that? The latter question first. We are seeing a sudden rush deployment of assets into the Middle East by this administration that has been very hesitant, reticent to increase their force posture in the Middle East, as they, of course, have been on a similar trajectory of the last administration of trying to pivot out of the Middle East and focus instead on the threat from China. Instead, we have seen a U.S. destroyer dispatch from the U.S. Navy, F-35, F-16s, in addition to A-10, to augment and supplement an already robust U.S. Navy maritime security patrol in the Gulf, which was implemented to respond to, just in the last couple of months, Iran starting to seize or attack or harass maritime commercial traffic in the Gulf, including seizing a couple of oil tankers, potentially in response to the U.S. Seizing of an oil tanker. We are seeing additional exercises between the United States and Israel that clearly seem signaled towards the Iranians that the exercise is about Israeli capabilities and Israeli planning for a strike inside of Iran. Pretty forward-leaning by U.S. Central Command and U.S. European Command and their Israeli counterparts, and releasing this information into the public domain. So there is something happening here. The U.S. Central Commander just returned in the last 24 hours for discussions with Israeli counterparts. We also saw a phone call from the U.S. Secretary of Defense to the Israeli Minister of Defense, Gallant, also happening in the last 24 to 48 hours. All of these continuing to be signals. Now, obviously, there's other things at play. There's the judicial reform. There's, ensuring that the enemies of Israel don't see daylight between the U.S. and Israel. All that could be true, but when you see forces actually being deployed, and in addition, we also saw an announcement of a marine amphibious ready group, multiple marine U.S. Navy vessels moving into the region as well. In addition to that air power coming in addition to the U.S. Navy patrols going in, something is happening in the threat picture, and we don't really know. Is it preparations to seize more vessels, mining the Gulf, something on the nuclear side, something on the Russia side, something on the threats to U.S. forces in Iraq or in Syria? We don't know the answer to that yet. This remains classified. But if you follow the force posture of the United States, the last time we sort of surged into the region in this way, I think back to 2019, when there was a threat picture that came in following the U.S. Removing the oil sanctions waivers in May. And you recall John Bolton making an announcement on behalf of the president that the U.S. would be sending in a carrier strike group in response to a threat that we had been seeing from the Iranians. That is usually why you would surge in this way. Okay, so we're offering up billions of dollars. We're releasing billions of dollars to the Iranians. At the same time, there's a threat picture that seems to be increasing. And there is this disconnect between American policy in trying to reach an understanding with Iran, but that policy empowering the illicit activity on the other side, U.S.-Israel military cooperation increasing, but it's still a lot of controversy surrounding whether or not that cooperation is contingent on coordination, consultation by the Israelis with the United States before taking any military action, despite Prime Minister Netanyahu making very clear publicly that Israel would not cede its right to freedom of action in the region. All of that, obviously, behind the scenes, with a lot else going on with Rob Malley, the U.S. Special Envoy to Iran, who's no longer the U.S. Special Envoy to Iran, at least on the website and on Twitter, but hasn't formally, as far as we know, been truly fired and let go and his position taken away. An acting deputy special envoy now filling in, and his face and words filling a Twitter account and webpage for the State Department. Reportedly, a growing FBI investigation that started as an investigation just by the State Department's own security personnel. We don't know the details of this. They have not been confirmed. There's a lot of rumors that you can Google and read about. And I don't want to sort of just throw out speculations and rumors until law enforcement or the intelligence community or some other official has confirmed it on Capitol Hill. But needless to say, it is a very strange situation. There is a lot of deceptive remarks that have been made by the administration over the last several months, leading people to believe that Rob Malley was still in charge. Rob Malley was on a personal leave. Rob Malley had some family health issues. Instead of being honest with the Congress and with the press, that there was some sort of security issue going on, a potential criminal investigation. Why that deception was taking place is a very good question, one that will have to be answered by the administration. When did they know? What did they know? What was Rob Malley allowed to do in the interim period between the time that they first found out about something and the time that he was finally put on the full administrative leave without access to information or meetings and without being able to represent himself to foreign governments and to the media as the special envoy? But also a lot of question marks about why we are learning more about this case from the Tehran Times, an Iranian government mouthpiece, instead of our own government. This could be a propaganda play, it could be a disinformation play, or it could be actual sources that know things. This could be two camps inside the Iranian government trying to push each other with Rob Malley having gotten very close over the years with Foreign Minister Javad Zarif and others in that sort of echo chamber. But again, we don't know. I don't want to speculate. This could end up being something completely innocent and harmless. It could end up being something that we can't even think of and can't even imagine. But the onus really is on the administration to come forward with some modicum of honesty and information, both to Congress and to the American people about what is happening here, especially if the FBI is involved and we are hearing all kinds of crazy rumors. That's a pretty good picture overall. We have a shroud of secrecy on Rob Malley, but we have an even broader shroud of secrecy on the entirety of our Iran policy. And so looking at the tea leaves, following the news, following the money, following the fourth posture of the United States, you begin to see a very disconnected policy where the threat from Iran remains high and is getting higher, and the policy of the United States continues to get weaker on the diplomatic and political front, even though our military leaders are being forced to respond to whatever that threat is that's rising. And my conclusion will be two things just to take away. Number one, we saw that a lot of the people who are pro-JCPOA blamed the Trump administration, blamed maximum pressure, blamed taking away oil sanctions waivers for driving a threat from Iran, that Iran is responding to harshness from the United States. If we were to remain in the nuclear deal, if we were to relieve sanctions, Iran would respond in kind. That had already been disproven during the JCPOA, but that can't pick that ball back up, especially in those days after we had ended the oil waivers and we had to send that carrier strike group back into the Gulf. We have been giving Iran over the last month billions of dollars. Totally, just here you go. Let's de-escalate. Here's billions of dollars. And we are seeing a threat picture in response. So recall that Iran is our enemy, whether we give them money or we take money away. And it's better for an enemy, an adversary, a threat, to have less money than more money to be able to threaten you. That's number one. Number two is to understand that where we are going forward here, Congress is going to have to assert itself. Congress, there's clear evidence now of an evasion of Congress, trying to get around the law. Congress has the ability to pass resolutions, demand documents, hold hearings, request witnesses, pass laws that restrict certain things that the administration can or can't do. It's going to be really incumbent on Congress now to get into this game and not just be an observer and a pundit, but to assert its longstanding prerogative over U.S. sanctions and protect the United States national security to ensure we're not subsidizing both sides of a war in Ukraine and that we're not subsidizing Iranian nuclear misconduct and terrorism against U.S. persons. Looking forward to all your questions.
Thank you, Rich. We have questions. So starting with confusing you even more, confusing the situation even more, Iran has imprisoned and executed an awful lot of people, regime opponents, specifically this year. Even the United Nations, and I say even the United Nations in capital letters, has called this a horrific situation in Iran. It was designed, I suppose, to quell the uprising that's been going on for a long time. So two questions. Has it taken the protesters out of the streets? But secondly, what is Washington doing to help these people, or at least to make its unhappiness known to the Iranian government? We're doing all this stuff in the face of an awful lot of people being killed. What's going on?
Yeah, we're doing absolutely nothing. That is the policy of the U.S. government. And I think what we have learned is that the true intention of the administration, which was predictable, was to just wait until things, quote unquote, died down once it was out of the media. One of the core allies of the administration, a big advocate of the JCPOA, somebody who, by the way, is named in the Tehran Times, close to Rob Malley. I won't say his name. He's quoted just in the last few weeks in mainstream media saying that the dust has finally settled on the uprising and now is the time to re-engage for diplomacy. Well, I will submit to you that FDD actually runs a protest tracker. If you go to our website, you will find our weekly tracking, our daily tracking of protests inside Iran. They actually have not subsided. The media got tired of reporting on it and trying to understand it. Since the most high-profile cases started getting deterred, especially by these executions. But the smaller gathering The 50 people, 100 people, even large gatherings continue to pop up every day all around Iran. They cannot stop it. It's not stopping. But because the attention of the international community has faded away, the celebrity videos have stopped being posted, the pressure on the president to say something at a rope line right before a November election has dissipated, we are seeing the Iranians feel very empowered to go back to the more overt repression that we had seen. The morality police have just been redeployed last week inside Iran. That is now prompting a resurgent, more public women's rights movement coming back on as the hijab laws are being enforced in an even tougher way than they have been the last few months, more like what we had seen that led to the death, to the murder of Mahsa Amini. And so I think that this issue is not going away. It's one we need to call out. And unfortunately, for anybody who had taken a position a few months ago saying we need to stand with Iranian women, we need to stand with the people of Iran, this is a sick regime, this is we can't negotiate with this regime. And to suddenly now be like, well, we need de-escalation, we have an understanding, diplomacy is the best route, things have died down. No, those people need to be held to account. If you are going to give this regime a dime, you are giving them a dime to persecute women and minorities and the entirety of the population. And so I would hope that we could move towards a maximum support campaign for the Iranian people. We published out of FDD in the fall a very big memo with dozens and dozens of policy proposals of what a maximum support campaign could look like, what we could do to help the people of Iran. We may get another chance at doing that in the days ahead as the morality police come back out, as you will see some incident like Mahsa Amini's case happen again. It's inevitable, which could spark more public attention, more public street demonstrations than what we've seen in the small pocket protests, and maybe give us another bite politically in Washington to do something, not just stand by, take notes, and put a footnote in history.
So that's one place where stated U.S. policy, which is support for minorities, support for women, support for, those sorts of things that we have as Americans always considered important. So the policy goes against our stated principles, our stated objectives. There's another place where that happens, and you pointed to it, which is Iran supplying Russia with armaments. So not only are there drones and there are rockets and there are all kinds of things, but one of the things that was discovered is that inside the Iranian drones, there are Chinese parts, which means that the Chinese were breaking the embargoes on the sale of this and that. And okay, not a word. So we're supporting Ukraine with a lot of money and a lot of weapons and a lot of military support. But yet two countries are out there undermining that support, and we haven't said much about it. Yes, we did say one thing about the Iranian drones, nothing about the Chinese parts. So again, you have another place where our stated objectives are at odds with our behavior. Here's the question. Congress, and we have like 7 questions that say the same thing sitting in front of me. Congress, we have a Congress in this country. When President Herzog stood there and talked about Iran and talked about Israel's position on Iran, those people stood up and cheered. They applauded him, Democrats and Republicans. Where the heck is Congress on this stuff? That's your question.
I took note. I don't know if it was lost on most Democrats watching who support the JCPOA and have supported the president in his diplomatic outreach, as they all clapped for a big applause line of, you can't negotiate away the nuclear weapons capability. You can't just say diplomacy while Iran runs over the nuclear threshold, and everybody clapped. Yeah. It's like, okay, but does everybody understand that's what the president's doing right now? Which was kind of the point of the speech, without, a very Herzog way, without calling out the president, trying to do it subtly. Well, subtlety doesn't work in Washington, Mr. President. Now you know. But the point is, yes, I agree with you. As I said before, the Congress could be doing a lot of things. It could be passing a lot of bills, a lot of resolutions, putting people on record. Resolutions mean something, by the way. I know we always think like, oh, well, we can't get a bill through the Senate and the president would probably veto it, and it's such a big fight. Putting people on the record on a resolution that is a signal to private sector actors who might be invited to do business by the Biden administration to buy things and sell things out of these accounts, putting us on record in support of Iranian women, putting us on record opposed to the administration's policies, delegitimizes those policies because there is an evasion of Congress going on. They're not being submitted to the Congress for a vote. Therefore, if the Congress takes a resolution of disapproval on its own unilaterally, and the administration keeps going forward, that is for the world to see. This was done in a bipartisan way, rejected from the Congress, and the administration is on its own sort of out of the mainstream fringe policy that has no political support from the elected representatives of the American people. That aside, your point, underlying point, raises two things. One is our Russia sanctions are not being enforced. And I can do a whole webinar on the fundamental flaws from the very beginning of our Russia sanctions architecture and why it's not working. But one of the things that we're not doing that we could be doing is simply enforcing the sanctions we do have against Chinese firms and banks and companies that we see supplying Russia, that we see doing things that are not allowed under U.S. sanctions, even these U.S. sanctions. And we don't do that. Obviously, we've seen this, de-escalation, by the way, is the word of the month from this administration. We're de-escalating everywhere. We're going to de-escalate with the Chinese. We're de-escalating with the Iranians. De-escalation with other parties is soon to come, I imagine. And so part of this de-escalation with John Kerry's green diplomacy is that we are not enforcing our sanctions, which is true in the Iran context as well. We have not been enforcing our sanctions on any Chinese company that goes up to the state-owned enterprise level that's involved in now 1.6 million barrels per day of imports of Iranian oil. I failed to mention that at the beginning. I talked about all the cash that's moving. There's a more basic thing that's going on right now. We are not enforcing our sanctions. That's like the baseline gimme to the Iranians. They have now gone from roughly 300,000 barrels per day under the height of maximum pressure during the Trump administration to, according to at least the Wall Street Journal last month, 1.6 million barrels per day of oil exports. You cannot get to 1.6 million barrels per day on just blaming sanctions evasion and illicit activity. I'm sorry, it's not possible. I worked this issue, including working Chinese targets that were trying to violate our sanctions all the way until the Secretary of the Treasury and others had to have very tough conversations. And we saw the Chinese back down. They do not want a state-owned enterprise, especially with the way their financial system right now, their economy, their woes domestically right now. They don't want to see a major SOE get targeted with U.S. sanctions. But we are not enforcing them. We have given Iran permission to go export more and more and more, and they're reaping the benefits of that already. One last thing I'll say on the transfer of the weapons to Russia and some worrying things we've seen about Russia now coming back to Iran. We saw the CIA director last week say that Russia is now potentially helping Iran with their space launch vehicle program, their SLV program. People should understand that Iran has a space launch vehicle program, but they don't have a satellite program. So anybody who thinks that they are just building space launch vehicles to put satellites in outer space should be sipping something else today. The key reason why they have an SLV program is to learn how to build intercontinental ballistic missiles, because it's the same type of structure of the rocket that's going up. That is how they learn how to put an ICBM into launch to target not Israel, not the Gulf, the United States of America, right? And that's why Russia, I believe, is helping them now in that program to try to perfect that ICBM program. Not covered by our understanding, of course, because why would we want to actually do anything to protect the U.S. homeland where we don't have the missile defense capabilities we need on our East Coast? That aside, the things we're seeing going from Iran into Russia, the armed drones, the ammunition, the potential for ballistic missiles as well, brings up another thing that's happening right now and a failure on our U.S. policy. What else is happening this year? October is a big date. October is another sunset of the JCPOA. Remember the sunset provisions? These were all the crazy ideas, these expiration dates on the deal, and then some that we gave to the Iranians as part of the 2015 deal and locked them into a Security Council resolution. The first one hit in 2020. The international conventional arms embargo on Iran expired. The next one comes this October. the international missile embargo on Iran expires. It will become legitimate under the Security Council resolution for Iran to transfer ballistic missiles to Russia, for Russia to transfer missiles into Iran, for all kinds of different missile cooperations between the Chinese and the Iranians. Now, we do have U.S. sanctions. The Europeans and the UK will have to decide what they're going to do as well, which could, by the way, put them for the first time in violation of the JCPOA, where they're still members. But the only way for us to stop the expiration of the international missile embargo is to trigger that snapback at the UN, to collapse all of the JCPOA finally, to bring back all of the restrictions on Iran. The US has taken a position where they will not support that. They also say the US can't do anything about it. It's a European issue because they're in the JCPOA. We can't do it. The Europeans have taken the position in consultation with the Americans that they will not be snapping back either. So we will have, come October, the Iranians and the Russians say very loudly and correctly that, at least according to the UN Security Council, they have legitimacy to move ballistic missiles back and forth to help each other in missile programs, in addition to the armed drones program that we already see. And we call out today as a violation of the Security Council resolution. That talking point will have to be removed from all US government documents because it will no longer be a violation come October. The Iranians and Russians, by the way, say it's not a violation. You should just understand that. They say these drones were covered by the 2020 arms embargo and that they're already legitimate for transfer. This is a big deal. Why is it a big deal? Because other countries around the world do look at Security Council resolutions as being important, right? We've gotten into a mode of saying, oh, we'll solve it with our sanctions. And sometimes that's true. But it's a lot easier to go to third-party countries and say there's a Security Council resolution and we have US sanctions backing it up. When the Security Council resolutions go away and it's just us, it's just us. What do we just see in the last few days? Bolivia, of all countries, has announced they are in negotiations with the Iranians to import their armed drones. They want to use it, they say, for transnational drug trafficking and cartels and human trafficking, etc. Okay, I don't really trust the Bolivians. If you guys are following Bolivia at all over the last few years, and the idea that there's going to be a defense relationship, a missile relationship, a drone relationship between Bolivia and Iran in our own backyard, that doesn't sound good. Who else is going to sign up for this? And what are we going to do about it? Losing the Security Council resolution is a big deal. And if we're not going to snap back, we can talk about why we're not snapping back. Once again, we are leaning in, offering political support and economic support to Iran, support to Russia, meaning effectively we're playing both sides of the war in Ukraine.
So let me suggest that Venezuela is playing in that Bolivia-Iran thing, and Nicaragua is playing in it. And from the US perspective, there's a lot of trouble south of our border. So, which leads me to 5 different people have asked the same question, which is unusual here. What are we getting? Why are we doing this? There has to be a reason that the Biden administration follows the Obama administration, Trump being the exception in the middle. But this is all policy that we saw in the previous administration, where Biden was then vice president, now he's president. What could he conceivably see as the benefit to the United States from the behaviors? I know that's speculative. I don't know where you're going to go with that.
So Rob Malley is ideological, right? So Rob Malley is the type of individual who truly believes in the JCPOA construct, and Iran is not our enemy. We've created that. We're actually Iran's enemy, and that we're driving their threat perception. He also believes that Hezbollah and Hamas are not terrorist organizations, all of those things. Okay, so there is that ideological wing that was very central in a lot of the Obama thinking and driving the JCPOA, and there are some people who are carryovers into this administration. That is true, and that drove a lot of their policy for the last couple of years. There are also people in the administration who are pragmatic and practical and have a list of their priorities that they're juggling right now, with Russia being at the top, China being second, and Iran probably being third, maybe other things being third, first above that. And they are now in re-election mode. And the president is running for re-election. And they have a directive, in my view, which is de-escalate wherever we can de-escalate and avoid crisis until next November. If we can get Iran to agree to de-escalate for the next 18 months, we've achieved something. We can focus on the Ukraine conflict. We can focus on our de-escalation with China. Why are we de-escalating with China? How outrageous? You think that the Iran policy is outrageous. Think about how outrageous our China policy is right now, and what a very near-term bad idea. We'll be paying this one off with negative dividends in just the next couple of years, when, according to our military commanders, the Chinese reach overmatch of the U.S. military in the Indo-Pacific, and Xi Jinping decides it's the day to finally launch the invasion of Taiwan, and we're not ready. We are in this mode right now of politics and de-escalation and avoid crisis and kick the can down the road. And I think what's very notable in Secretary Blinken's comments, now coming back to the Iran issue specifically, I think that they have conceded that Iran has and will have the fissile material to build a nuclear bomb. And there's really nothing we can do about that. That has been conceded. Pre-JCPOA, the idea of the JCPOA was based on this idea of a breakout timeline. Could we expand Iran's breakout timeline? How much time it would take Iran to take its uranium stockpile, produce more uranium, and with all of its enriched uranium, enrich further to weapons grade to have at least one bomb's worth of weapons grade uranium? How long would that take? And so the marketing pitch of the JCPOA was, we've gone from a few months to a year, right? Their breakout timeline is a year. We no longer talk about breakout timeline. The administration no longer talks about breakout timeline. That's not their red line for military action anymore. What Secretary Blinken said on television is that while it's concerning that Iran has this stockpile of high enriched uranium, and they may even continue to amass fissile material, which means producing at some point weapons grade uranium, they could do all of those things and still not be a nuclear threat to the United States unless we see them weaponized. So they have now moved the goalpost to the last piece, which is the hardest piece to detect, which is the easiest to cover up and to disperse inside Iran, and potentially move into an underground facility that they claim is not an enrichment facility, and therefore is not subject to IAEA safeguards at this place that they're now building, or at any of the universities that are connected to their nuclear weapons program, SPND. So we are in this place where I think the administration may even be conceding 90% enrichment, right? They're trying to stop it because I think they're afraid that the Israelis will act on that. But what Secretary Blinken is saying is, yeah, they could go to 90%. That's not really going to be even that for us to make a crisis out of. We don't want to see them go there because it'll force other things. They'll be in the news, the media go crazy. So we don't want that before the election. That's why we're willing to pay them off to stop the 90% for now. But certainly 60%, 20%, the stockpile, the centrifuges, we've lost. We've lost that. The Iranians have won, is the administration's view. And that, I think, is driving the policy right now of what can we do right now that's the U.S. advantage? We can try to prevent a crisis. We can prevent them from going to 90% and weaponizing. And so we're willing to pay them. It is a flawed premise. It is very backwards thinking. It is more dangerous to U.S. National security, both in the short term and in the long term. But I think that is the policy of the United States.
Well, to me, it makes it even more important for Congress to weigh in here, because if the administration is moving along that line of thinking, I think congressional pushback might be helpful. But let's shift gears a little bit geographically. So we know what Israel's position is on Iran and Iranian nuclear weapons, and President Herzog made that, if you didn't know it, he made it clear last week, didn't he? But there is a secondary problem that Israel has, and it's actually a more immediate problem, and that is that Iran funds and supports and trains Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Palestinian Islamic Resistance Movement. So all of that was in Gaza, but now it is appearing in the West Bank, and it's appearing very militaristically in the West Bank, and that's what the Jenin problem was that Israel took care of. How successful would you say Iran has been or is being moving itself into the West Bank and planning for the aftermath of the Abbas regime there?
I think Iran has been, unfortunately, fairly successful. I think they're meeting incredible resistance and counter operations from the Israelis in these attempts. But they have no resistance from the Palestinian society at this point, from the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian security forces. And so I think their freedom of action in the West Bank is at a high point due to problems that we face in the Palestinian Authority itself because of Abbas, because of the lack of a succession plan for Abbas, because of his focus on his own family, greed, corruption, and not actually doing anything to build a Palestinian state if one were to exist, to do anything to take control of his territory and show the ability to secure his population. The Iranians are taking advantage of that moment. And while the administration sort of came in with the thesis of, we're just going to pour more money into the Palestinian territories because that was the problem, it completely ignored the fundamental problem of leadership on the Palestinian side of where is Abbas going? Where is the Palestinian Authority going after Abbas? What is the plan there in the West Bank itself, internally, for Palestinian institution building? By ignoring all of those key questions that were more fundamental than what is the U.S. government funding, they have allowed the Iranians to move into that space. And so you are correct. We have also seen a very worrisome development that we saw in this most recent round where we thought there was a multi-front confrontation that was about to start. It ended up being very Gaza-focused as the Israelis took out Islamic Jihad leaders in a targeted fashion in Gaza, but we first saw rockets coming across from Syria, from Lebanon, unrest in the West Bank, and of course, rocket attacks from Gaza. But there is a joint coordination cell between Hezbollah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad that's been established, where they are really working together in an unprecedented way, directed by the Iranians, coordinated by the Iranians, funded by the Iranians, in a way that we had not seen previously. Islamic Jihad now is a wholly owned, owned and operated, as they would say in the TV business, terrorist organization for Tehran. Hamas is increasingly reliant and taking direction from Iran, and as we know, Hezbollah is a proxy for Iran. So they are working together on all fronts, including the West Bank. And you're correct to point out this threat is growing. By the way, it's also growing in Jordan. The Jordanians are very concerned about the IRGC presence in Jordan. For those who've been wondering, where are these terrorist groups getting all their weapons from? How do all these weapons keep coming into the West Bank? They just keep appearing. And the IDF keeps going in to have to seize them and raid and destroy stashes on an almost daily basis. Are they just coming from Gaza over, like we're in an episode of Fauda and there's some secret tunnel? More likely, there's gun running and trafficking going on from Jordan, with the Iranians sort of walking right across and doing certain things. In fact, we saw a Jordanian member of parliament arrested for gun running, for being part of a trafficking network, and then just sort of went away from the media, like, oh, okay, I guess that just happened in Jordan. So we have a lot of problems going on. Just this morning, those saw the reports of a rocket attempted attack on Israel out of Jenin. The second one we've seen in the last few weeks. If we start seeing the West Bank become a staging ground for rocket attacks that are successful against Israel, the way that we have seen out of Gaza, the Iranians will have succeeded. They will have a missile or rocket threat against Israel on every border. And clearly, the Iranians are pushing back on what the Israelis started a couple of years ago, the octopus doctrine under Prime Minister Bennett, which was the idea that we would focus, attention, we, the Israelis, saying to themselves, we will focus attention on Tehran. We will stop fighting the tentacles in Syria, in the West Bank, in Gaza, and Lebanon, and instead take the fight to the head of the octopus. And that was having incredible results for a long time with very daring operations, dazzling things that we had seen come out in the press reports. And I think that the Iranians, benefiting now from their de-escalation pact with the Saudis and the Yemen conflict dying down, are now turning their total focus on their own octopus doctrine, sort of a counter octopus doctrine, which is to reactivate the tentacles and to make sure Israel is truly surrounded by each of the tentacles and increase the threat in each area. And that is driving the IDF responses on a daily basis. And it's something we do not see appreciated by the Biden administration. Instead, you get calls for de-escalation, Security Council meetings, Security Council statements, calls from the Secretary of Defense to his counterpart to say, we really need you to de-escalate in the West Bank. Are you kidding me? Are you reading the same intelligence? Do you understand what Iran is doing? How about calling to say, hey, how else can we help you root out the Iranian infrastructure in the West Bank? I think this is another area for Congress to step in and start asking these questions, start getting briefed on this, and start asking what is the plan here to push the Iranians out of the West Bank and the rest of Israel's borders.
So we're coming to the end of the program, Rich. And I have to say, this has been enormously instructive. I've learned a lot. I know the listeners have learned a lot, but it's also enormously depressing. And I really hate to go out on a depressing note. So people who listen regularly know I'm going to give you your hardest question now. Give us a positive thought on which to end this program. Got one?
It's a perfect time of the day for those who know the tradition. You're supposed to be really, really sad on Tisha B'Av until right around this time of day, and now we suddenly move on to chairs and think happy thoughts for the rest of the fast. And so my answer to you would be Tom Friedman has a very interesting column today in the New York Times. I don't always appreciate Tom Friedman's writings, but today it's interesting and instructive because it's based on the same conversation he had with President Biden last week, where he had originally talked about judicial reform. Now he's talking about something else, which has not been in the press for several weeks, and I think very intentionally to let the media frenzy over it die down and give people room for negotiations. Senior White House officials are in Saudi Arabia reportedly today, picking the ball back up on discussions with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia over this big deal where you could see Saudi-Israeli normalization move forward in exchange for some sort of security commitments from the United States and presumably, as Friedman lays out, some other types of concessions from the Israelis on the Palestinian front that are enough to give MBS cover to move that normalization forward. What those are, the nuances of that we can get into. I wrote a very long essay on this a few weeks ago for Mosaic magazine. You can go take a look at that. The road to normalization between Israel and Saudi runs through Washington and how to get there. But I do think that if there is serious negotiations on all sides, a willingness to think creatively, and most importantly, if the Saudis actually want this, right, which remains sort of this open question. If you had asked me the question in May, I would have said absolutely. If you asked me the question today, after I see what the foreign ministry of Saudi Arabia just put out in the last few hours on Ben-Gvir going to the Temple Mount, I would say not so sure. But if this is a decision that it's in the best interest of Saudi Arabia's long-term security and their economic security, and more importantly, their goals for Vision 2030 to have full integration with the Israeli economy and the Israeli security and intelligence apparatus more than they already enjoy, then I think this is solvable and could be a huge game-changing event for the region and for the world, and really overnight take us from total chaos and doom and gloom surrounding the state of Israel to a flywheel effect that will push Iran way back on its heels and hopefully drive them well within its borders and on its way to where they belong long term, which is the ash heap of history, as Ronald Reagan would say.
Saudi Arabia and Israel, I will take that as an optimistic viewpoint, and I will thank you for all of your inputs today. And to our listeners, next week we have David Weinberg, who is going to address the subject of Israel and Saudi Arabia from the Israeli point of view. So it will be a nice follow-on, and I hope you all will join us. In the meantime, Rich Goldberg, thank you very much for a great, great program.
Thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for spending your hour.